Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the New Construction Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Anya Chrysanthon, and today I'm joined by my guest. Her name is Dawn Duhamel, and Dawn and I had an opportunity to meet during Women in Residential Construction conference in sunny Arizona. So welcome to the show, Dawn.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on. So guys, to give you a little bit of a background, Dawn and I actually sat next to each other during one of the sessions. It was a Poker Diva tournament. So it was the coolest thing. They had a poker instructor come in, and she had given a talk about how poker is really similar, the game of poker is similar to corporate America, and the rules that you use in poker really apply to corporate America and how you can navigate through corporate America. So Dawn and I were sitting next to each other, and we actually played a game of poker. So everyone had their sunglasses on, and it was really fun. So we had a good time. And then next thing you know, Dawn's getting up to give a talk, and I was like, wait a minute. So Dawn, welcome to the show. And usually we like to start things off by giving our listeners a little bit of a background on yourself. So if you don't mind telling us your journey through the building industry, how you got into it, and what your career progression has been.
Absolutely. So home building and the industry is all that I've ever known. So I graduated from college, and where I went to school, they had a job fair, and Pulte Homes happened to be at the job fair. That was when Pulte was still out of Detroit, and I went to school in the Midwest. So I went to a job fair, interviewed, and next thing I knew, I was employed by Pulte. So I started off in a training program actually in Detroit, which was really fun. And there were a handful of us that were picked from a bunch of Big Ten schools to be a part of this Pulte University program. So started there, trained there for an entire summer, and then all of us just dispersed throughout the country. So I went to Chicago, and I sold on site there, and worked at a bunch of different products, from townhomes for first-time buyers to move-up product, all over the Chicagoland area. And after about 3 years or so, corporate called and said, hey, we have your next plan. And what we'd like for you to do is to move to Northern California, because at the time, Northern California was they had the strongest marketing program in the country, and they wanted me to go from sales into marketing. So I moved to Northern California, stayed there for about a year, and just did nothing but immerse myself in marketing training. Mm-hmm. After that was over, the company said, you can stay here in Northern California and be a general sales manager, or we can move you to Colorado. So I'd never been to Colorado, hadn't started a family yet. My husband and I said, we should probably just go see. And moved here to Colorado, where it's so beautiful and perfect, and we never left. So I stayed with Pulte for a couple more years, after which I got a phone call, and I started a division of Watt Industries, which is it was out of Southern California. They wanted to make an entrance into the Colorado market, so I helped start that up. That company ended up merging with John Lang Homes eventually, and I went on with John Lang for several years. And then I sort of got to the point where I felt like I was almost ignoring my kids. I had 3 little girls, ages 5, 3, and 1. Work was awesome but crazy, and I felt like I was putting work ahead of them. So I left working from a builder and went to work for an interior design firm. And so that and where I'm at today, those are kind of my 2 careers within the home building industry. I've either worked in business development for interior design firms that work solely with builders and developers, or I've worked for builders. So
that's very cool. And it's awesome that you got to travel so many and like live in so many cool places. You know, it wasn't like, oh, you're going to North Dakota.
Right. I was in San Francisco, and now I'm in Colorado and Detroit. I mean, say what you will, I thought Detroit was super cool. So
yeah, so that's definitely awesome that you got to travel to so many places and experience so many different places. And sounds like you've kind of wore so many different hats throughout your career as well. So starting off as sales and then kind of transitioning into marketing and leadership roles. So what was the most fun you had? Which role do you think was wow, this was if I could do that for the rest of my life, or that was really fun experience?
Right. That's a great question. I think what I've realized is that what I really love is the startup piece. Mm-hmm. So when I moved to Colorado, I didn't necessarily start Pulte. Pulte was here, but with a skeleton crew. I mean, they maybe had 5 employees. And by the time I left, in the sales department alone, I had 14 salespeople working for me. So a huge growth in a really short period of time. And that's really fun. That whole idea of, okay, we're at this point and we want to go to this point, and how do we make that happen? That I really love, which when I left Pulte and went to work for Watt, also was sort of that same place, right? Just starting a company from scratch. So when I think of the different things that I've done, I think that that's what I like the best. I'd like to go and work for companies where they're at a certain point and they need to take it to the next level.
So it sounds like you have that entrepreneurial spirit.
Right. That's right. Without the risk, really, right?
Without the what?
Without the risk.
Well, yeah, maybe one day, you never know, right?
Exactly right.
Speaking of you never know, so I was completely blown away by your presentation during the conference, and I think most people at the conference felt that your story was just so genuine, and you opened up to a group of strangers, basically. And I think you talked about a topic that many of us are afraid to talk about. It's kind of like the money topic almost. Right. So you guys, Dawn had talked about being let go from a job that she loved and how it impacted her life and the struggle that she went through, and ultimately how she came on the other side of it. So after sitting in the audience and listening to it, first things, I wanted to give you a big, big bear hug and thank you for sharing and opening it up. Because again, I think it's such a taboo topic that a lot of people don't want to show their vulnerability. And that the fact that you opened up and said that, hey, this happened to me. And I bet you so many people sitting in the audience have gone through something similar, but nobody wants to talk about it because everyone wants to, I'm doing great, I'm successful, everything's great. So I thought it was very important to talk about it, because I bet you a lot of my listeners have gone through something similar in their career, whether it's in the building industry or elsewhere, where you're being let go. Maybe your position got eliminated, maybe you got fired, but either way, the consequences, you're out of job, and how that affects you on a mental, physical, emotional level, and kind of what we can do to try to get through that period. So Dawn, if you don't mind giving us a little bit of a background of that story and kind of how it all unraveled.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I had, after working for a couple of home builders and my kids were little, I went to work for an interior design firm, national firm. So I was still interacting with builders all the time. And that was really fun for me because I clearly knew how to speak the language. I had already handled running sales and marketing departments. I had handled going from a small division to, exponential growth quickly. So I was really having a great time of my life. And I got a phone call several years back from an old Pulte friend who was a regional president for a building company that, by the way, no longer exists. So he called and said, listen, we need some help in Denver. We really kind of need to turn the ship around. We're bringing in a new division president. We have some things going on. I know you. I'm comfortable with you. What do you think? And I said, wow, I'm having kind of a lot of fun right now. And the last time I was working for a home builder, I felt like it just really was my whole life. And now my kids are older and I'm kind of on the tail end. Right now they're kind of in high school. So I might little babies anymore, but now I'm in those last critical years of spending any time with them at all. So I probably should really give this some thought. And went home, my husband and I talked about it. And, you know, one of the things he said to me was, in the back of your mind, I know that you've always thought you would go back to home building. And so this is really coming just not through almost any effort of your own, right? Someone is just approaching you and saying, hey, what do you think? And so we talked about it, and I said, okay, there's a big hill to climb here because there's a lot that needs to happen in the division, but I'm up for it, and that's what I love, right? I like to go in, and I like when there's a problem, I want to try and fix it. So anyway, I accept the position, go to work for the company, and lots of challenges, let's say. We've got salespeople that are doing things with superintendents. They're selling finished basements on the side, which we all know no one ever can do. Lots of things that were really violations of what the company principles and policies were. But because there had been a recession, things weren't being run like normal, which I think was common for a lot of home building companies at the time. I think that everyone was just trying to do whatever they could to survive. So sometimes when you come into a company where there are a lot of people who, I'll call them survivors, right? They are still employed and they're thrilled that they're employed. It's difficult for them to really embrace growth, right? Because in my situation, years, employees were just cocooning and doing whatever they could to basically keep the business up and running. And that,
you have such a fear too. I think it's the psychological thing. Like every time you get a phone call from HR, it's like, like, am I next? Am I next? Because I mean, I personally know so many people who were eliminated during the downturn, you know, and it's not anything personal. It's just, that's what they have to do.
Right. And so the people that are left, end up taking on multiple roles, which was also pretty common at the time, not just in our industry, obviously across the board. Yeah. So you start to develop this sense of yourself that what makes me important at this company is the fact that I'm handling 6 jobs. Well, when the market changes and you go from a restricted mode to a growth mode, it's a completely different style of thinking. That's sort of what I came into with this particular company. Most of the people that were there were survivors and were doing multiple jobs, which at some point in time was fantastic. But when you're trying to then move to a growth mode and you're trying to say to people, hey, we have resources now. Let's take some of these things away from you so you don't have 6 jobs. Let's get you down to the one job that really is your job description, and let's let you fire on all cylinders and do that one really exceptionally well. That is actually a difficult thing for people because they have spent so many years defining success as the ability to have multiple jobs, that to give those jobs away then starts to make them feel like they're not as valuable. So that's just a dynamic that I think a lot of people had to deal with, and that's just sort of where I was at that time. So ultimately what happened is the company was a public company, and they had something called a whistleblower line, which lots of public companies have. Mm-hmm. Those of you who are listening to this, one of the things I would suggest is just for your own education, just check to see if your company has one. It's just something that would be good for you to know. Anyway, so what a whistleblower line typically is, it's a way for an employee to make an anonymous phone call to divulge some sensitive information that is outside of company policy. Those are my words. So as an example, you're working in the finance department and you discover that someone is sort of
commingling funds, right?
Commingling funds, siphoning funds, all those fun things. And it maybe as your supervisor, you're not sure what to do. This idea is it gives you a way to make an anonymous phone call to let the company knows something is going on that shouldn't be going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the philosophy behind a whistleblower line. So what happened was someone called our whistleblower line at the company and said that I was having an affair with our division president. And the evidence, yeah, and the evidence they gave for that was that the division president and I would spend a lot of time in his office with the door closed.
Wow.
I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone does that, but so a few things happened because of this. And on a quick aside, just in general, since your listeners don't know me, I'm in my 30th year of marriage. I've been arguing with my husband. I adore him. He adores me. No affairs, no nothing weird, no separations. You know, I mean, literally we have like a Disney relationship. So of all the things someone might accuse me of, and, you know, we're all different things when we're not at our best, but that would be the one thing that if you actually really knew me for 2 minutes, you would not accuse me of. It's just not in my DNA. It's not at all who I am. So what happened was at our company, when someone called a whistleblower line, it linked directly to the board of directors. It was reported to the board of directors. So it required, you know, it required some action. So what happened was then the corporate HR department came in, talked with me, and really at the time what I was told was this is not that uncommon. And I understand, right. I mean, how is this not uncommon? It should be really uncommon. And the response was, when new management comes in and they are holding people accountable, turning the ship around, changing policies, changing procedures, the existing employees don't like that, and oftentimes will reach out and just make things up with the idea that then the person that they're calling about has sort of a strike against them, which unfortunately is exactly what happens. So it doesn't matter whether or not the accusation is true in any way. It just doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because now that person has a whistleblower call kind of against them. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize any of that, by the way, at the time. I was just so flabbergasted that this was happening to me, of all people. And I think also, you know, Anya, candidly, I just thought that stuff happened on TV.
Yeah. But I mean, I can imagine that the stress that it put, I mean, I can't imagine coming home and being like, hey, honey, how was your day? Guess what happened to me today?
Absolutely.
Like, and I can't imagine telling my husband, hey, somebody called and said I'm having an affair. I mean, that alone probably puts stress on your marriage, because then no matter how great your relationship is, you know, the other person can go like, well, why are they calling? Maybe something is going on. Like, you know what I mean? And then I'm sure with you and the division president, like that relationship had to be weird, because awkward. Now suddenly it's like, oh, everyone's watching us. Like, so I'm sure it's awkward on all levels.
Yes. And, you know, being now so many years removed from it, it is, looking back, I mean, it is really incredulous. So, so you don't know who called. But in my case, there were some indications of suspicions. I guess let's put it that way. I don't know how else to say it. And not necessarily from me, because I literally just didn't think people did that. So even though it happened, even though I was sitting across from HR, I couldn't believe that anyone that potentially worked directly for me or with me would do something like that, because I think that is awful thing to do to someone. So when I told my husband, he said to me, you know, he was really actually, thank God, unfazed by the whole thing. I was not, but he didn't really have the reaction I did. And I said to him, aren't you upset? Doesn't this bother you? Can you even believe this? You know, I mean, I was worked up. And he said, Dawn, desperate people do desperate things. And that's what's happening right now. And that was so great for me, right, on an interpersonal level, that I had something like that in my life that was supportive, but also great perspective, because it's true. Someone that would go to that extreme, that would be willing to potentially really wreck someone's reputation, that is desperation. I mean, and really now, I got looking back on it, I have to tell you, I'm still in that place. I am still really shocked that anyone would do that. I mean, you pick up the phone, you start dialing a number, and at some point you go, this isn't right. You hang up the phone, right? But to get to that point where you let the phone call go through, you hear yourself saying things that are not true. I think that I truly do have a lot of compassion for what state someone must have been in to do something like that. So anyway, so that happens. And there is some transition within my department, let's say that. I think the division and corporate thought that there were probably a couple of people that were part of that phone call. But of course it is anonymous, so I need to just say that. It's not like anyone knew who. And so the person I was working with at the time in my department, not on the sales side of things, but within the office, ends up leaving the company at my request. And I continue to move forward. We continue to have great sales. In the middle of all this, which your listeners will completely understand, we have some trade partner issues. And the trade partner issues that we have is that the cabinet company we were using completely closes. And you know, it wasn't like they said, hey, everybody, just want to let you know, things aren't going like we thought. In about a month, we're closing. No, this was literally people showed up to work at the cabinet company in Texas, and there was yellow tape around the building. They couldn't go in. They couldn't retrieve their belongings. Like, the company closed in an instant.
That's so crazy. And I'm sure, like, being a sales rep, that gives me like anxiety.
It should give you a lot of anxiety. So they were, unfortunately, our sole cabinet supplier. So not only would this affect houses that were scheduled to close in, let's say, a month or 45 days, but it affected any warranty issues that we were having. You know, think about that. Just, you know, a cabinet door comes in and maybe it's not perfect, but at the walkthrough, the customer says, I'm willing to close, but I want that replaced. And the builder says, no problem, we'll replace that. No, actually, you're not going to replace that ever, because it will never be made again. So you can imagine on just that example, and then just magnified by hundreds of houses in production.
Oh, this is literally giving me major anxiety. I can't imagine what the salespeople have gone through.
And I would say the bulk of the psychological trauma, if we want to call it that, ended up on the salespeople's shoulders, right? It's not that our construction team didn't feel it. They absolutely did, and certainly warranty did too. But on a weekend, when people have time, right, you know where they're going. So They're coming to the sales office and saying, listen, you told me 2 weeks ago that this was going to happen. Has it happened? What's your solution? And of course, that's happening at the highest traffic moment possible, when brand new people are coming in and the salespeople are trying so hard to deal with this issue that is starting to consume the entire division. And also, we're saying, hey, we know that you're dealing with this, but we have sales numbers that we need to accomplish. So let's do our best to placate those folks and do what we can for them. Let's not forget about the new people coming in. And I mean, I can try and spin that however I want, but you and I and your listeners know that that's not a good situation in any way. Mm-hmm. As that continues to occur, and continue, what I mean is, as the cabinets remain an issue, cabinet company, we had them come in, they couldn't perform. We find a different cabinet company. Can you handle warranty? Yes, we can. No, they can't. So it just becomes this sort of inertia that is like this tsunami that, you know, is just hovering over us at every moment.
And it's so crazy because, I mean, the home building industry, it's really, you're not in a vacuum, because no matter how great you are at your job, you know, it's the production that has to deliver, and then it's all these other partners that have to work together in almost perfect harmony in order for it to work. Because and I've been in similar situations where something was happening on a production side where, like, we're losing you know, supervisors, we're losing project managers, and I was like, who's building the homes? And you can't show that to the customers, but it's you know, starts to trickle down, and then it's like that what starts as a little issue becomes a much bigger issue suddenly. So oh my goodness, I can only imagine.
Right. And think about how long do you think an exceptional salesperson can exist in that state, even knowing that all of management is putting 100% of their effort into solving this, but with each new idea, it fails. How long could someone really just even maintain that kind of upbeat, positive, can-do mental state that you have to be an on-site salesperson? So that's a very difficult situation that my team is handling, and basically every single division or every single community is in the same boat. They're all trying to figure out what to say to customers. They're getting frustrated, right? Salespeople are getting frustrated now because they're saying, "Hey, I thought you said with this new cabinet company this was going to be resolved," and we said, "Well, that is honestly what we thought, and so it's not working. We're gonna do something else." So good news was we kept trying different things until we eventually fixed it. But during that period of time where you're working hard and it's not being successful, it's just difficult. So I tell you that story to give you the state of mind of the salespeople at the time is difficult.
Right.
Also, shortly after this is resolved, the corporation wants to change the way salespeople are compensated. And I'm not saying they were taking away a commission and going to a flat rate or anything like that. Everyone was still on commission, but there was this philosophy, and I understand it, by the way, which was this. If you and I are salespeople, and you happen to get assigned to a community that just takes off and is doing exceptionally well, the market is doing well, the positioning of the community is super, and I happen to get into a community that's really difficult. And the company realizes that one community is going to be a little easier sell than another. Should I, in the tougher community, earn less? Right?
Right, I can see both sides of it, because I've seen salespeople who, no matter what community you put them in, they seem to kill it. So
absolutely. And you know when you also have a community that's tough, right? Because all the salespeople know, like, oh, I don't want to go to that community. Right. So the philosophy was changing within the company, and the company was saying, you know, what we'd like to do is target a number, roughly, that we would like our salespeople to make. And then per community, we'd like to take a look at that and tweak commission amounts so that basically we have a team of very well compensated people, but they're all going to make about the same amount. Now, I'm fine with that. What's challenging is if they're not already set up that way. Someone has to come in and convince the sales team that's been making a certain amount of money in a certain way for years that this is the new philosophy. So we have a cabinet issue. We have a change in compensation. So I give you those examples just to let you know what was swirling around the team.
Yep. So I'm sure it's probably hard for you to hold on to your top performers at this point.
100%. And it's also hard, candidly, to maintain their trust.
Right.
Even if you've had an amazing relationship with them for years, because once you start to really hit someone's compensation, it's like you and I were talking earlier. Sometimes you don't want to have that conversation about compensation and money and how that works and what's fair and what's not fair. But the point is, for on-site salespeople, a lot of times, the hours that they work, the weekends that they work, I mean, they deserve to be incredibly compensated.
Absolutely.
Once you start to change it, even if the compensation still remains great, that's challenging. Okay, so that's all happening and that's fine. And I'm towing the corporate line and I'm talking about what's coming next and this is what we're doing and having individual conversations with everyone, knowing that it's making my team a little uncomfortable. What are your choices, right? So we just move through it. So at this point, there's a new division president. There's been turnover in the VP of construction. There's been a new finance person come in. So basically the whole executive team has gone through some sort of turnover. I'm still there.
Woohoo!
Yes! So we decide we're going to do a team bonding and we're going to go bowling. So we all go bowling. The executive team has different parts of sort of like a company meeting presentation. I get to talk about new product, which I love. And here's all the new communities that are coming up. And here's the product that we're going to be building. And super great, all fun. We all do our, we all have our segment. We finish the segment and then we all go bowling. So on a quick aside, my first and last initials are the same, letter D. And we, for some reason in the company, we had multiple people with double initials. So we had LL, we had DD, we had CC, and then we had multiple people with those initials. So it was like this kind of funny thing that we always talked about in the division. And I had a friend at the division who was in architecture, and every morning he'd come in and he'd say, hey, double, and I would say, hey, triple. And it was just this weird thing that we did every day. Doesn't make sense, but it was all based on these double initials. So now we're back at bowling. We're finished. We're going to our lanes. The beer is flowing. Everyone's having fun. I am not drinking, not because I'm have some kind of holier than thou feeling that I shouldn't be drinking. But I just don't maybe like beer that much. That's what everybody was drinking. And I had some new salespeople that were actually literally starting that day. And, you know, I just had a certain decorum that I felt like I didn't really need to drink. So I go to my lane and I had kind of a cardigan sweater on and I take it off and I have a t-shirt on. And the t-shirt has, you know, like a 4-leaf clover on the front. It says Lucky Charm on it. Like it's a great bowling shirt. And it was a shirt that a friend of mine had given to me. And on the back of the shirt, she had printed on the shirt what she always called me, which was double D, right? Again, double initials, everybody. Right. So the shirt actually said the word double or D, double D. So I thought, this is a perfect bowling shirt. Is it not? Don't you wear that kind of stuff to bowling? Like,
it's kind of like your number in the back.
Yeah, right. It's almost like if you look at people, bowling team names, they're the funniest things you will ever see in your life. Like people get really clever when they bowl. So right. I'm going to just be spirited. It's going to be fun. So we bowl. We have a great time. It's so fun. We leave. And about, I'd say, 2 weeks, a month, something like that later, the division president, remember this is a new one now, calls me into his office and says, so we had a call on the whistleblower line.
Oh my God.
Right. And I thought, what is going on? I mean,
are we having an affair? Right.
No, you know what? So funny. So I actually, you might think that because it happened to me before,
right,
I would be on edge and think it was about me again, but I did not. I'm really kind of not that person, right?
Well, because I think you didn't have a reason to, like, you know, if you're acting shady, yes, then you're thinking that. But if you're not acting shady, then it's like, oh, who's in trouble?
Totally. So I was thinking, okay, well, we've had a lot of issues in the division, right? Like just some of the ones I just explained to you. And those were I shouldn't say small, but I mean, there were just issues everywhere, right? And so I thought, well, someone's really unhappy. And I know that people have been unhappy anyway, because first the cabinet situation, who knows what it is, but I was thinking it must have to do with some of these challenges that they've been having in the field. So I, closed the door. It's just the division president and I say, well, what happened? And he said, it's on you. The call's on you.
Oh my God.
And I mean, whatever you're seeing in me right now as we're talking in this kind of pregnant pause I'm having in our conversation is because even now I'm trying to describe what it was like to hear those words a second time. And really was unbelievable. And so then, you kind of recover from that. And I said, well, what for? I mean, what is someone calling for? And he said, do you remember that T-shirt that you wore to bowling? And I said, yes, I remember that. And he said, well, someone called the whistleblower line and said it was inappropriate and that they were offended. And honestly, Anya, I mean, then that was the beginning of the end. Because now what I had was 2 whistleblower phone calls, which, by the way, I mean, I don't have any statistics on this. I think it's something that at some point people research, but
you should have played lottery or something.
I know. I should have gone out that very day, right? And so what are the chances? What are the odds? What's the reality of how many times one person gets one whistleblower call, let alone one person getting 2, let alone them being just so outrageous? So, so the division president and I sat down and I just said, okay, well, do you have to let me go? And he said, not right now. And so I thought, okay, you know what's going to happen? I am going to do what I always do. And I'm going to I am just going to put my nose to the grindstone. I'm going to work so hard. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And this will go away too. This will just be an experience in my life that will mold me in some way, but I will get beyond this. Like, this is not going to be the end of it for me. Mm-hmm. So,
were you, I can just imagine, I mean, if something like that happened to me and you're in a leadership position, how do you feel? Because you don't know who did it. So it's almost like, do I just act as if nothing happened and, I continue to be the same person to everyone? Or suddenly is my guard up now and I'm wondering who did it? And that's got to be tough to not let it affect relationships, because you're probably like, who the heck's doing this?
So that's a really great question. I would say a couple of things. One is, most people in the company, well, I shouldn't say the company, in the division, didn't even know we had a whistleblower line, and so therefore didn't even know how to call it. Mm-hmm. So there were only a handful of people that could have known really how to do it the first time. So to think that those same individuals were more than likely a part of the second one, I think that's a reasonable assumption. Mm-hmm. To assume that. So in my mind, I felt pretty clear on probably who was behind it. And yes, every day before I came into the office, I would say to myself, I am bigger than this. And so if this is what someone has to do because they're resentful or because they're angry, I can't control that. I literally can't. And I cannot function coming in every day looking at people that potentially I thought might have been a part of the process, mm-hmm. Make the call, and have that resentment myself. That just for me personally, I can't thrive that way. So I just came in every day and just basically said, I'm going to pretend that the call never happened. because there's not any other way for me to do it. There just wasn't. So that would have been okay in and of itself, except that because the second call said it made them uncomfortable, you can imagine that a publicly held company would have to handle that in a certain way, right? To protect themselves.
Yes.
Whether or not the company believed it or felt like it was something that deserved attention, I'll never know. I just know that they were forced to act on it in some way. So the way that they acted on it was I was required to go to each member of my team and have a conversation. Every single salesperson, marketing people.
A conversation about the double D shirt?
Yes. So I actually went out and made appointments with each person individually, did not talk to anyone in a group. It was all one-on-one. And I sat down and I said, I just want you to know, I thought that shirt was fun. I clearly knew what it said on the back. I never thought anything of it in any kind of an inappropriate way at all. And
wow. I said, wow, like that's gotta be like an awkward conversation to have with all.
Well, you know what? I just embraced it. I just, you know what? Do I think that any of my direct report teams made that call? No. What if they did? Like, what if they did? What if they were uncomfortable and felt the need to call corporate to say that? Then I wanted to honor that and have empathy towards that and compassion for how difficult maybe that would have been. So that was my mindset, and that's what I went into. And without fail, each person said, why are you having this conversation with me? This is silly. And I just kept going with the conversation, right? I didn't say, oh, thank goodness you're saying that because I think it's weird too. Never. I said, you know what? I'm coming out here with the best and purest intentions, and I want you to know that I'm sorry if in any way it did offend you. Even if you're saying no, I also understand that it's also what you would sort of say in this situation, so we don't have to have a big conversation around anything other than I just want you to know if in any way it offended you, sorry. Go through that whole process and fast forward about 6 months or so. The first quarter of the year is over and the sales team has sold more homes in a single quarter than has ever been sold in the division.
Yay!
Woo! Right? We are so excited, and this is still with, you know, some of these closings started with the cabinet issues, right? So like we are so proud and we're excited and we're in the middle of this compensation piece and all that's happening, and still we sell more houses than have ever been sold. So that is March 31st.
You must have felt proud.
Oh my gosh. You know, we had boards everywhere and we were tracking it and we had bar charts and graphs and it was so fun, and bells, and, you know, I mean, we were down to the wire and it was so fun.
So not only you came through, like, you know, you were victorious, the last one standing, but you also like, ta-da, here's like, you know.
The team is performing really under all these circumstances.
Right.
That would have been March 31st. The quarter's over. So exciting. So the next day is April 1st, April Fool's Day, and I come into the office and the division president calls me in and lets me go.
Okay. What did he say?
Well, I would say when you work for, well, first of all, let me just say that I myself have, obviously in the roles I've had in my life with builders, had to let people go.
Right.
They're not performing or whatever the issue might be, right? So, you know, when you've done it yourself, you know
it's coming.
The energy around it, you know what everything looks like. So he called me in, he said, close the door. I looked on his desk, I saw the folder. So, so I sat down. And I said,
you had no idea it was coming, though. Like,
no, I didn't know.
I mean, no. You're like on top of the world. Basically.
Totally on top of the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no idea. So came in and I saw the envelope and I sat down. I said, are you letting me go? And he said, yes. And I said, okay. I mean, really at that point, there's an envelope, right? So it's all done. My check is sitting in there. All the paperwork I have to sign is in there. There's no negotiating. There's no conversation. You know, there's a lot that's happened to get that moment behind the scenes. So there, you know, and I knew that. So there's really not any. There's no point, you know, at that moment for me. It just became more of. Okay, well, this is my reality at this moment in time, right? I'm going to have to walk back out. I'm going to have to say goodbye to a couple of people. I'm going to have to gather my stuff, and I'm going to have to leave as quietly and dignified as possible, because what I don't want right now is any drama around it for my staff, right? They're already going to have a rough time with this anyway. So sooner I can leave, the sooner the division president can make an announcement and do what he has to do and all that kind of stuff. I just, you know, needed to go.
How was, like, were you able to keep it together? Like, I can't even imagine, like, just,
you
like,
know,
because you didn't have like, although you had those 2 strikes against you, you know, it's almost like you didn't see it coming. Like, you didn't, or did you think it was going to happen? Like, were you worried? Like, so you know, sometimes, like, you know that, like, it may happen versus, like, completely out of the blue where you're like, what?
Right. Well, so I think that, did I think it was going to happen when it happened? Absolutely not, because we literally just finished the best sales quarter ever. And my entire life has been work hard, achieve, get rewarded. Very, very simple, right? That's just always been my philosophy. That's what I teach my kids. If you, it pays off. Right. Simple. So to answer your question, certainly never thought it was going to happen when it happened, just because we had just had great performance, and performance is usually honored, right? That's the thing, right? But when the second whistleblower call happened, I also knew that my long-term tenure was tenuous at best. So to say that, oh my gosh, I never thought it would ever happen to me, I just think that the company, many public companies are risk aversive for reasons, right? I mean, there's a lot of legal entanglements. And so I just think that once you have these phone calls on you, even if,
because I mean, yours are kind of ridiculous, like, you know what I mean? Like,
oh no, and to be honest with you, since the company is no longer a company anymore, I stayed in touch with tons of people from that company, including HR. So I have some background information to know that a lot of people thought it was absolutely ridiculous, and that the second phone call wasn't really about the shirt. The phone call was about making a second call on me. Right. And the company knew that. It's a public company, they have to do something, right? So I in the back of my mind, I realized, hey, 2 strikes, even if they're ridiculous and or not even true, it doesn't matter that much, because then you're almost like a risk in some ways. So when it happened, I didn't completely understand the timing of it, and still kind of in retrospect, I guess I don't. Because I think it would have been better for even my staff if it would have just happened at the time of the second call.
Yeah.
Because even if people thought it was ridiculous, it would have felt like, wow, I can't believe that happened. But I guess, you know, you get a couple whistleblower calls on you. There's kind of a, you know, consequence to that. So that was the one thing that made the whole process, honestly, that much more difficult for me, is the timing of it didn't seem to coincide with the performance of me and my team.
Yes. So you feel like it was kind of like, even though you had those things against you, and because you were in a management role, you knew, like, so rationally you knew like that was not good, but at the same time, because of how things were going, it felt like undeserved, kind of like, you know, like it punished me for what, it was not the like the punishment was not fitting, like there was no, it was kind of like unfair, right?
Right,
Like,
almost like
right,
it just didn't make sense. It would have made sense to me at the time of the second call, even though the whole company knew what was happening.
right.
It made sense. Not that I would have thought it was, you know, who knows what I would have thought at the time. But I guess looking back on it, that was what was difficult, not just for me, but also for a lot of the employees at that time, was sort of like, whoa, didn't that happen 6 months ago? So exactly why are you getting let go? And, you know, it just, anyway.
So what happened to you after? Like, I can imagine you've been with this company for quite some time at this point. You're on top of the world. You're a great performer. You're being let go. So what happens to you in your self-esteem?
So, you know, what's interesting is what happened right away is that I got a phone call the same day, and I was interviewing the next day, and I had a job the same week.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right. And so I don't want to say that in any kind of a way that seems cavalier. It just was the facts of what happened to me at that time. It just, a lot of things were kind of right place, right time. And I went to work for another builder right away.
Mm-hmm.
Was in a long commute situation, which wasn't my favorite, and then got offered another position to come back to the interior design side of things, that position. And in some ways that felt great, right? Because I was able to say, oh, look at me. I was let go for the first time ever at the age of 50. I mean, I had no coping skills for that. But I guess it doesn't really matter that much because I got a job right away, and then I got another job, and everything's great. And, you know, but then at some point, when you don't process something like that, it catches up to you one way or another, and it caught up to me. And I think I absolutely started recognizing that I had fear was my companion. And even if things were going well where I was kind of operating out of a place of fear, nervous of what might happen next. Because if you haven't been let go in your life, you don't have coping skills for that. So one of the things I'd love to share with your listeners is that when you do get let go from a company, just know that it's helpful. Long term for you, it can be helpful because you may run into something similar to what I did, meaning that someone just doesn't really like what you're doing. Someone doesn't like the fact that you're holding their friend accountable. And while you may not be working for a place with a whistleblower line, there may be other tactics that people take that are not supportive to you that end up with you losing your position. And by the way, that has nothing to do with how beautiful of a human being you are. It just doesn't. All it is a moment in the timeline of your life that doesn't feel great, but you will recover and you will move on and you will have resiliency that you maybe, if you were like me, didn't necessarily have before. Mm-hmm. Know that this is just one person's opinion. I am still capable of being successful and being a good human being and loving my family and giving great customer service and opening the door for people and living a great life. This cannot define you. I want to just say that.
I love that because I think a lot of us associate our self-worth with our jobs, especially in the sales role. If you're good at it, you feel like, I mean, like you said, it's all encompassing, you know, it swallows you whole. And a lot of times you almost put your personal life in a back burner. And suddenly if you're let go, and maybe you're used to being the provider in a family, and suddenly you're not. And how that can change how you identify you and your self-worth. So I think that is a very important thing that you're saying to people, that, you know what, if it happened to you, you just learn, and it's a good thing that, you know, in the end, you're going to look back and maybe be better prepared for something like this. Because I mean, ultimately what happened to you, it's not something you could have really prepared yourself, right? Because it's not something that it's not like you heard these rumors about this company that maybe you should watch out for somebody. It was just kind of a weird, freaky thing that just happened.
Right. And you know what? It also, you know, sometimes in our lives, I think we have things that happen to us that we don't even realize are possible. And they can be really positive and they can be really negative, right? But we have moments in our lives where we have aha moments, and we say, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that. I'm going to have to change my perspective now because I have new information that I didn't have before. So I really thought that if you worked hard and were performing, that would be rewarded. I really didn't think that someone could make stuff up about you or turn something innocent into something terrible with just a phone call. I didn't think people really did that. And number two, I didn't think a big public company would take the steps that they did. So my point, right? That's just something I didn't know. Now I know that. Now your listeners know that. Yeah. So things can happen to you, and most likely they will happen to you, and they might not be how you thought it was going to go, or what you think is fair, or what you think is right. But really what you have to do in that moment is to allow yourself to, I think that there's a lot of people in the world who will say, hey, bad things happen to you, pick yourself up, brush yourself off and just keep going. And I guess what I'd like to at least share from my own personal experience is that I actually needed time to be able to be sad. Mm-hmm. I went from one spot right to the next, and, checking all the boxes off on paper. It all felt really good to me. I was able to keep some sense of my ego intact because, look, people are hiring me. I'm getting phone calls all the time. This is great. But because I never allowed myself to actually be sad that someone had decided for me to stay at a place that those kinds of emotions just stay inside of you. They just don't go away because you're not paying attention to them. Mm-hmm. And they will come up at some point somehow. And so that was a big lesson for me. I hope, of course, like we all do, that this never happens to me again in my life. But if it does, here's what I know. I'm going to take the moment and be sad about it. Maybe I'll go for a run. Maybe I'll listen to some sappy John Mayer. Who knows? But I will allow myself to say, this wasn't what I had hoped it to be, and that's okay, and I'm okay. But I'm going to be sad about it for a minute, and then I'm going to pick myself up, brush myself off, and start over, and it will all be okay. But that was a really good learning lesson for me. Mm-hmm. I think especially for people who are in situations where they are highly compensated and, like you mentioned, they're the breadwinners for their family. Mm-hmm. Something like this brings out all sorts of emotions, all kinds of stuff from your past and your childhood and what you think your future could be. And you start really creating these stories that you don't need to. But you have to process the feeling of being sad or angry or hurt, whatever that is, and allow yourself to at least experience it. So that you can take that deep cleansing breath and say, okay, this is just one more story in my life of stories, and now I'm going to go create a new one. So.
I love that. Thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing that. And, when I was listening to your story the first time at the conference, you mentioned that there was one specific book that helped you pull yourself out of it. And it was some crazy book on cleaning, right? So can you tell us what is the book that we need to read?
So honestly,
even ourselves fired.
off the top of my head, but
I'll include it in the show notes. So if you don't mind emailing it.
It's really something about the joy, the Japanese art of decluttering or
Yes.
something like that. It's a really sort of long title, which really would not even be something I would buy. But during this sort of period of introspection, when I was sad and feeling like, listen, I have to deal with these things that are happening inside of me. I went to Barnes & Noble, which I recommend to everybody. Just randomly walk around Barnes & Noble and something will appear when it's supposed to. And for me, it's this book. And it was this book on sort of decluttering, which is not something I would ever be interested in. So honestly, I just think it's like a garden. I put this book in my hands and I bought it and I read it and I did everything that it said. And I will tell you, one of the reasons it changed my life is because it made me realize that you just don't need to have anything in your life that doesn't bring you joy. Not a scarf, not a t-shirt, not a pair of earrings, not people, nothing. And so because the process starts with sort of decluttering things in your life, and I did exactly what the book said, and I realized, well, I had really honestly just a lot of stuff that had a story attached to it, or the reason I didn't want to give it away, or I felt bad about something, but in and of itself wasn't bringing me any joy. And when I completely cleansed things in my life, it put this sense of finding joy in me that enabled me to do that in all kinds of places. And I was at a crossroads of a couple of different employment opportunities. And because I was reading this book at that time, it made it very clear to me which of the two options was right for me, because one gave me more joy when I thought about my role than the other. And so even something like that, you wouldn't think this book would help you with your career, but for me, it did. So for bringing
that was probably the whole thing that, you know, I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. And a lot of times you don't see that reason right as it's happening because you think it's the worst thing that's happened. Right. So I guess for you in the end, now you live with joy, and if it doesn't bring joy, it's not part of your life. And I'm sure now you're probably looking back and thinking, wow, it's probably one of the best things that could have happened to you. Oh,
absolutely. If that would have happened to me, first of all, I couldn't share my story, right? And to your point, after the conference where you and I met and I gave that speech, I had multiple women come up to me and say either, I'm going through this right now and thought I was the only one, or I'm about to go through this based on some things happening with my company, or I went through this a year ago and I just realized listening to you, I haven't really dealt with it. So it is something that is sort of this systemic issue, specifically I think with women, of what we do and how we handle that. And so A, I wouldn't have been able to share the story, and B, I would never have read that book. Literally, I make decisions in my life that way now. All decisions. If someone calls me and says, you want to go out, you want to do something, I recognize, hey, that's something I want to do, that's going to bring me joy, or it's something I don't want to do. And I'm no longer afraid to a lot of things that I probably said yes to previously. So yeah, I'm in a way better place for a lot of reasons. So absolutely happy to am.
And thank you so much, Dawn, for sharing your story. I think people are going to love hearing that. It definitely made a big impact on me when I heard it, and definitely TED Talk for you. So
I promise.
I will link all of the information for how people can connect with you on the show notes. So if you don't mind shooting over your, whatever you hang out online, if it's Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever you prefer, I'll link that on the show notes, as well as the name of that Japanese art of decluttering, so that people can all benefit from that wonderful book that otherwise we would never have heard of. So, and I hope that, we get to see each other at the next conference in Arizona. I'm definitely going.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Dawn. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.